Hi there. Today we're going to be talking about the attempted invasion of Japan by the Mongols. When we last left off, the Mongols were able to go and conquer China. Now, if we think back to how they ruled China, they were cruel, they were harsh, they were rude, discriminated against them, which was very different than how the Mongols ruled their other places. We talked about this. If you surrendered, they gave you rights. You often had more rights than you had with your previous governments. You might pay less taxes. Your governments were less corrupt. You had trade, freedom of religion. But not so with the Chinese. With the Chinese, you had restricted rights. They were cruel and harsh. Another place that also suffered under Mongol rule was Korea. When Korea was invaded, the Mongols sent ambassadors to Japan and said, "You ruler of a small nation, pay us tribute. Recognize that we are superior." And the Japanese, they don't respond at all. Apparently, Kublai Khan sent 6 envoys, and 6 times they came back with no answer. So the Mongols did what the Mongols do. They amassed a fleet and they attacked. This attack was large. The Japanese had no idea how to fight the Mongols. In Bushido, which we'll talk about later this year, the Japanese, a samurai, he would go out, he would announce his lineage. He would say, "I am Colin Kenny of Rhinebeck, New York, and my father was Ed Kenny, electrician." And they would go through this whole lineage. Well, when the samurai did that when the Japanese come, single file, coming out, announcing, planning on having single combat with a Mongolian soldier, they swarmed them like bees and slaughtered them. So this isn't going well. But then, miraculously, when the Mongols go to attack further into Japan, to attack Honshu, they go and have all of their ships wiped out by a typhoon. What's amazing is 7 years later, the Mongols do the same thing. They attack. The Japanese are still unprepared. They can only muster 40,000 samurai. The Mongols attack with probably around 120,000 soldiers. And once again, a typhoon comes, destroys the Mongol fleet. The second one is even worse than the first. There were probably 1,200 ships that the Mongols sent, and maybe 100 managed to make its way back to Mongolia. So a typhoon is what we would call a hurricane. It's just a different part of the world. And they make a special name for this typhoon. They call this typhoon the Kamikaze, the divine wind. Now, this is going to have huge implications because the Japanese are essentially going to think they're invincible after this, that the gods, the spirits, or the kami, as they call them, they're watching out for Japan. And we're going to see this go and have implications going all the way up to World War II. Some of you might have heard the term kamikaze before. Those were the planes that were flown by Japanese pilots that were on a suicide run to crash into United States aircraft carriers and destroyers. So that's the Mongol invasion of Japan and how it failed. It's a pretty amazing story. Switching gears a little bit, looking at the greater Mongol rule, because we know China, Korea were aberrations. Typically, where the Mongols ruled, things went well. That is, if they didn't murder every single person there. So we have this term, Pax Mongolica. Now, I bet if you think back, you can think of a Pax something else. Maybe your substitute teacher will pause the video and you can raise your hand and say the Pax. Hopefully you said Pax Romana, which means, of course, pause again, solicit a response. Hopefully you said Roman peace. So we have this Mongolian peace. Now, of course, it was because it was under the pain and fear of death. But we see this huge amount of trade going through Asia and Europe. There were soldiers who patrolled the trade routes, making sure it was safe. There's stories of how their horses, they got loose. They were camping out and their horses ran away. And after miles and miles, someone went and found the people that the horses belonged to, asking, 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 and made sure to get it back to the owners because they were afraid if they got caught with somebody else's horses, they'd be killed. One of the things that we see here through the Mongolian trade is this idea of this exchange of technology, this exchange of information. Things like paper money. Yeah, that was invented in China, not something we use throughout the whole world. Gunpowder, once again, invented by the Chinese, and we're going to see with our next three groups, the gunpowder empires, how that's going to change the world. Movable type, that's right, that keyboard you have on your computer or on your smartphone, its first inclinations come from China. Passports, but what you use to go over to other countries. So much in medicine, so much came from China and was spread to the world. You have to remember this came at a cost. Low estimates are at 20 million people dying. High estimates at 50 million. A lot of historians think it was probably around 41 million total. That's a huge number. Was it worth the trade? Was it worth the spread of knowledge? Here's an example of some of the different items that were being traded, where they came from. You don't need to write this down. Please don't. And here we just see some of the different trade routes going through. All around all those red lines, all those black and gray lines, trade routes that the Mongols did. So let's look at this growth. We see this is when Genghis Khan starts his conquest. We see modern day Mongolia there, so most of that and a little bit to the north. Then we see first 13 years of Genghis Khan's conquests. Branching out further, we see them encroaching upon northern China. Then we see them continuing to go west, further. By the time Genghis Khan dies at 1227, we see all the way to the Caspian Sea, going to northern Korea, through northern China there, a lot of modern day Russia. Then we see after Genghis's death, going further, further, and we see 1279, the end of the Mongol conquest. This is when Sung China is conquered. We see all of that red. Now let's look at it in a more global perspective here. Humongous. Now, what's going to happen, of course, there's going to be great Khans. Genghis Khan is going to be the greatest of Khans, although some would argue that Kublai Khan would be greater. Kublai Khan is going to rule over the purple there, but these are going to be the four Mongol Khanates. A Khanate is just a fancy word, like a kingdom. Next time we're together, we'll look at the good, the bad, the ugly, or I like to say the crazy of the Mongol conquest. Hope you have a wonderful day.